What happens when someone decides to face their greatest fears, not with hatred but with wisdom? And how can ancient principles transform your modern life? Have you ever felt invisible? Like the whole world was against you and there was no way out of the pain? This is the starting point of a story that will teach you how to turn pain into strength. Using the secrets of the great Stoic philosophers. Stay until the end and learn lessons that will change your perspective on resilience, purpose, and overcoming adversity. The small town of Maplewood, nestled in the heart of New Jersey, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Its tree-lined streets and quiet neighborhoods painted a picture of serenity. But beneath the surface, life wasn't always as idyllic as it seemed. For 16-year-old Ethan Carter, Maplewood High School was more than just a place of learning, it was a battleground. Ethan had always been different. With his lanky frame, thick glasses, and a love for books that far outweighed his interest in sports or parties. He stood out in ways that made him an easy target. His classmates didn't hesitate to remind him of this daily. The jeers started small, whispers in the hallways mocking laughter during gym class, but over time they grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. "Hey, Four Eyes. What's the matter? Too busy reading to have any friends?" A voice cut through the air as Ethan hurried down the crowded hallway, clutching his backpack tightly against his chest. He didn't look up. He couldn't. If he did, he'd see the smirks, the pointing fingers, the eyes filled with disdain. Instead, he focused on putting one foot in front of the other, counting the steps until he reached the safety of his next class. At home, things weren't much better. Ethan lived with his mother, Sarah, who worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital. She loved her son deeply but often struggled to connect with him. Her well-meaning advice, "Just ignore them," or "stand up for yourself," felt hollow to Ethan. How could he stand up to people who seemed so much stronger, so much surer of themselves? One evening, after another grueling day at school, Ethan retreated to his room and collapsed onto his bed. His gaze fell on the stack of books piled neatly on his desk. Among them was a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which he had picked up from a used bookstore months ago. He hadn't opened it yet. The title sounded intimidating, like something meant for philosophers or scholars, not for someone like him. But tonight, something compelled him to reach for it. Maybe it was the weight of everything pressing down on him, or maybe it was the faint hope that somewhere within those pages, he might find answers. As he flipped open the cover, his eyes landed on a passage underlined in faded pencil. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Ethan paused, rereading the words several times. They felt strange, foreign, yet oddly comforting. Could it really be true? Could he control how he responded to the cruelty around him, even if he couldn't change the actions of others? Over the next few days, Ethan began carrying the book with him everywhere. During lunch breaks, while his peers laughed and joked at their tables, he sat alone in the library, poring over its pages. Slowly, ideas began to take root in his mind. He learned about Epictetus' teachings on distinguishing between what is within our control and what isn't. He read Seneca's letters, which spoke of enduring hardship with grace and fortitude. And he marveled at Marcus Aurelius' reflections on inner resilience. Yet, understanding these concepts intellectually was one thing. Applying them to his life was another challenge entirely. One afternoon, as Ethan walked home from school, he found himself cornered by three older boys near the park. Their leader, a burly senior named Jake, sneered down at him. "Look who we've got here. Little Ethan Carter, all alone again. Bet you're scared, huh?" Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. His instinct was to shrink away, to mumble an apology and hope they'd leave him alone. But then a thought surfaced, a fragment of something he'd read. "It's not what happens to you but how you react to it that matters." Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Ethan looked Jake straight in the eye and said, "I'm not afraid of you." The words hung in the air, surprising even Ethan himself. For a moment, Jake hesitated, clearly taken aback. Then, with a dismissive laugh, he turned and walked away, his cronies trailing behind him. Ethan stood there, trembling but exhilarated. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. He knew the bullying wouldn't stop overnight, but it was a start. A small, fragile spark of defiance had ignited within him, fueled by the wisdom of ancient philosophers who had faced their own trials centuries ago. The days following Ethan's confrontation with Jake were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt a newfound sense of empowerment, a fragile but undeniable confidence that he could face his tormentors without crumbling. On the other hand, he knew this was only the beginning. The bullies weren't going to back down easily. and the weight of standing up to them, even in small ways, was exhausting. At school, the dynamics shifted subtly but noticeably. Jake and his group didn't physically confront Ethan again, but their tactics became more insidious. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and cruel jokes about him began appearing on social media. One afternoon, as Ethan scrolled through his phone during a free period, he stumbled upon a meme mocking his glasses and awkward demeanor. The caption read, "Ethan Carter, King of Losers." Dozens of likes and comments piled beneath it. His stomach churned, and for a moment he considered deleting his account altogether. But then he remembered another passage from Meditations. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Ethan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He couldn't control what others said or did, but he could choose how much power he gave their words over his mind. Slowly, he put his phone away and opened his notebook instead, jotting down thoughts to process later. Writing had always been his refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos swirling inside him. Meanwhile, tensions at home grew as well. Sarah noticed her son retreating further into himself, spending hours holed up in his room. Concerned, she tried to engage him in conversation one evening while they shared a quiet dinner. "Ethan," she began gently, "is everything okay? You seem distant lately." He hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Part of him wanted to unload everything, the bullying, the loneliness, the constant battle within, but another part feared burdening her. She already worked so hard to provide for them both. "It's nothing, Mom," he said finally, forcing a smile. "Just school stuff." Sarah frowned, clearly unconvinced. "You know you can talk to me, right? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Her words warmed him, even if he couldn't bring himself to open up fully. That night, lying in bed, Ethan reflected on her offer. He realized that while he couldn't rely on others to solve his problems, leaning on loved ones for support wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a form of strength. It was something Marcus Aurelius had emphasized. Community mattered, but so did self-reliance. As the weeks passed, Ethan's resolve continued to grow, though not without setbacks. One particularly difficult day came when Mr. Thompson, his history teacher, assigned a group project. To Ethan's dismay, he was paired with none other than Jake and two of his friends. The thought of working alongside them filled him with dread, but he reminded himself of Epictetus' advice. It's not what happens to you but how you respond that counts. During their first meeting, Jake made no effort to hide his disdain. "Great," he muttered sarcastically. "Guess we're stuck with four eyes." Ethan clenched his fists under the table but kept his voice steady. "I'll do my part. Just tell me what you need me to handle." To his surprise, Jake seemed momentarily thrown off balance. Perhaps he'd expected anger or tears, not calm determination. Reluctantly, the group divvied up tasks and Ethan threw himself into his portion of the project, determined to prove his worth. Despite these incremental victories, Ethan's journey was far from smooth. His grades began slipping under the strain of constant vigilance, and sleep became elusive. Nightmares plagued him, visions of being chased, mocked, humiliated. Each morning, he woke feeling drained, yet he forced himself to get up to keep moving forward. One rainy afternoon, as he walked home from school, he found himself drawn to the local library. Inside, he wandered aimlessly until he stumbled upon a section dedicated to philosophy. There, among the shelves, he discovered letters from a Stoic by Seneca. Intrigued, he checked it out and began reading that very evening. In one letter, Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." The words resonated deeply with Ethan. He realized that every challenge he faced, every insult, every sleepless night, was shaping him into someone stronger, more resilient. He wasn't just surviving, he was growing. But growth often comes at a cost. A few days later, Ethan encountered an unexpected obstacle. Chloe, a classmate who had once been kind to him, approached him after school. Her expression was hesitant, almost apologetic. "Hey Ethan," she said softly. "Can we talk?" They sat on a bench near the soccer field, raindrops glistening on the grass around them. Chloe hesitated before speaking. "Look, I know things have been tough for you lately, and I haven't stood up for you like I should have. I'm sorry." Ethan stared at her, surprised. He hadn't expected an apology, not from someone who had never actively hurt him. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. Chloe sighed. "Because I see how brave you're being, and it makes me realize how cowardly I've been. I didn't want to risk getting bullied too, so I stayed quiet. But that wasn't fair to you." Her honesty caught Ethan off guard. For so long he'd assumed everyone either hated him or didn't care. Hearing Chloe admit her guilt, and seeing the sincerity in her eyes, was both disarming and empowering. "You don't owe me anything," he told her finally. "But thanks for saying it." As she walked away, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he'd believed. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a crisp autumn morning when the air smelled of fallen leaves and the promise of change. Ethan had grown accustomed to navigating the minefield of high school life with cautious steps. But today felt different. As he walked through the front doors of Maplewood High, he noticed an unusual buzz in the hallways. Students clustered in tight groups, whispering excitedly. Curiosity tugged at him, but he brushed it aside, focusing instead on getting to his locker. It wasn't until homeroom that he discovered the source of the commotion. Ms. Alvarez, the school counselor, stood at the front of the classroom holding up a flyer. Her voice carried a rare note of enthusiasm. "Attention everyone," she announced. "This Friday we're hosting our first ever student-led assembly on resilience and overcoming adversity. We've invited guest speakers, including alumni who faced incredible challenges and come out stronger. It's going to be inspiring, and I encourage all of you to attend." Ethan froze, his pencil hovering mid-air above his notebook. The idea of sitting through an assembly filled with motivational speeches didn't appeal to him. He'd heard enough platitudes about staying positive to last a lifetime. But then Ms. Alvarez added something that caught his attention. "And here's the best part. We're looking for students to share their own stories during the event. If you're interested, please see me after class." A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Most students laughed nervously or shook their heads dismissively. Public speaking was universally dreaded, especially in a setting like this. Yet Ethan felt a strange pull, a quiet, insistent voice urging him to consider it. That evening, as he sat at his desk with letters from a Stoic open before him, Ethan wrestled with the idea. Sharing his story meant exposing himself, laying bare the pain, the fear, the loneliness he'd worked so hard to conceal. Could he really stand in front of hundreds of people and admit how much he'd struggled? What if they laughed? What if they dismissed him as weak? And yet, another thought nagged at him. Seneca had written, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Wasn't this an opportunity to do just that, to face his fears head-on and demonstrate the strength he'd been cultivating? He imagined standing on stage, his voice steady, his words resonating with others who might feel just as invisible as he once had. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn his suffering into something meaningful. After hours of deliberation, Ethan made his decision. The next day he approached Ms. Alvarez during lunch, his heart pounding wildly. "I'd like to speak at the assembly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Alvarez smiled warmly. "Are you sure, Ethan? This is a big step." He nodded, surprising even himself with his conviction. "Yes, I think I need to do this." Preparing for the speech became both a challenge and a lifeline. Over the next few days, Ethan poured his energy into crafting his message. He drew inspiration from the Stoic texts he'd been studying, weaving their teachings into his personal narrative. He wrote about the bullying, the isolation, and the moments of doubt that had nearly broken him. But he also wrote about the lessons he'd learned, the importance of controlling what you can, of finding strength in vulnerability, of embracing adversity as a teacher. As the date of the assembly approached, Ethan practiced relentlessly. He rehearsed in front of the mirror, recorded himself on his phone, and even read portions aloud to Chloe, who had offered her support. She listened intently, offering gentle feedback and encouragement. "You're amazing, Ethan," she told him one afternoon. "What you're doing, it's brave. People are going to hear your story and realize they're not alone." Her words bolstered his confidence, though nerves still gnawed at him. On the morning of the assembly he woke early, his stomach in knots. He dressed carefully, choosing a simple button-up shirt and slacks that made him feel slightly more put together than usual. Before leaving the house, he paused in front of the mirror and whispered to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as students filed in, chatting animatedly. Ethan sat backstage, clutching his notes and trying to steady his breathing. When his name was called, he rose slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. Walking onto the stage felt surreal, like stepping into another world. The spotlight blinded him momentarily, and the sea of faces staring back was overwhelming. But then he began to speak. "My name is Ethan Carter," he started. His voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each word. "For most of my life I felt invisible. Like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the labels people gave me, or the pain those labels caused. He spoke candidly about the bullying, the sleepless nights, and the moments when he'd questioned whether he was strong enough to keep going. But he also shared the wisdom he'd gained, the realization that true strength comes not from avoiding pain but from facing it with courage and grace. When I first read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, I didn't understand everything. But one idea stuck with me: you have power over your mind, not outside events. That changed everything for me. It taught me that while I can't control what others say or do, I can choose how I respond. And that choice, that freedom, is where real power lies. By the time he finished, the room was silent. For a moment Ethan feared he'd failed, that his words had fallen flat. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the audience. It started softly but quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Tears pricked his eyes as he stepped off the stage, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed a shift in the way people treated him. Some classmates approached him to express admiration for his bravery. Others simply nodded or smiled, a small acknowledgement that meant more than he could articulate. Even Jake, who had tormented him relentlessly, muttered a gruff "good job" as they passed in the hallway. Though the bullying didn't vanish entirely, its sting lessened. Ethan had found his voice, and in doing so, he'd reclaimed his sense of self-worth. The aftermath of the assembly was transformative, not just for Ethan but for the entire school. His speech had struck a chord, sparking conversations that rippled through classrooms, cafeterias, and even locker rooms. Students who had previously dismissed him as an outsider now greeted him with nods or brief smiles. Teachers noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a softening of tensions, a willingness to listen more and judge less. For Ethan, however, the real transformation happened within. The act of sharing his story hadn't erased his struggles. It hadn't magically silenced Jake's taunts or erased the scars of years spent feeling invisible, but it had given him something far more valuable: perspective. He realized that his worth wasn't tied to others' opinions of him. It came from the courage he'd shown in facing his fears and the resilience he'd cultivated along the way. One afternoon, as Ethan sat alone on the bleachers after gym class, Chloe joined him. She carried 2 bottles of water and handed one to him with a grin. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her tone teasing but kind. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Ethan chuckled softly, taking a sip of water. "Just thinking about everything that's changed, and how much hasn't." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I get that. People don't change overnight. But you've already done so much, Ethan. You stood up there and told your truth. That takes guts." Her words warmed him, but they also reminded him of something Seneca had written. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence on the future. He realized then that he couldn't keep waiting for things to improve before allowing himself to feel content. Happiness wasn't a destination, it was a choice, one he could make every day regardless of external circumstances. Still, challenges remained. A few weeks later, Ethan found himself cornered again, this time by Jake's younger brother, Tyler, who had apparently inherited his siblings' penchant for cruelty. Tyler shoved Ethan against a row of lockers, his face twisted with anger. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" Tyler spat. "You think people actually care about what you have to say?" Ethan's heart raced, but instead of shrinking back, he met Tyler's gaze steadily, drawing on the lessons he'd learned. He responded calmly. "I don't know if anyone cares what I have to say," he admitted, "but I care. And that's enough." Tyler hesitated, clearly thrown off balance. Without another word, he stormed off, leaving Ethan shaken but triumphant. In that moment, Ethan understood something profound. Strength wasn't about overpowering others, it was about refusing to let their actions define him. As winter approached, Ethan continued to grow, not just emotionally but socially as well. Chloe became a regular presence in his life, often joining him for lunch or walking home with him after school. Their friendship deepened, built on mutual respect and shared vulnerability. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to trust someone completely. One snowy evening, as they strolled through the park near Ethan's house, Chloe turned to him with a curious expression. "Do you ever wonder what's next for you?" she asked. "After high school, I mean." Ethan paused, considering the question. Until recently, he'd avoided thinking too far ahead, afraid of setting himself up for disappointment. But now, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that his future might hold possibilities beyond survival. "I want to help people," he said finally. "Maybe write books or give talks about overcoming adversity. I don't know exactly what yet, but I know I want to make a difference." Chloe smiled. "You already are." At home, Sarah noticed the changes in her son. He seemed lighter somehow, more at ease with himself. One night, as they sat together watching TV, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "You've grown so much this year," she said softly. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." Her words brought tears to his eyes. For so long he doubted whether anyone truly saw him. Now he realized that his journey wasn't just about proving himself to others, it was about learning to see himself clearly, flaws and all, and embracing who he was. By spring, Ethan had become something of a quiet leader among his peers. When conflicts arose, students often turned to him for advice, not because he had all the answers but because he listened without judgment. He began volunteering at a local community center, mentoring younger kids who struggled with self-esteem issues. Seeing their faces light up when he shared stories of his own struggles filled him with a sense of purpose he'd never known before. One evening, as he prepared for bed, Ethan picked up Meditations once more. Flipping to a random page, he found a passage he hadn't noticed before. "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." It struck him then how far he'd come. His thoughts, once consumed by fear and self-doubt, were now colored by hope, resilience, and gratitude. He wasn't the same person he'd been at the start of the school year, and he knew he would continue to evolve. The climax of Ethan's journey arrived unexpectedly, on a bright spring morning that seemed to hum with anticipation. It was the day of the annual Maplewood High School Awards ceremony, a tradition where students were recognized for their achievements in academics, athletics, and community service. Ethan had never paid much attention to the event before. It always felt like a celebration for people who lived in a world far removed from his own. But this year was different. As he walked into the auditorium, flanked by Chloe and a few other friends, Ethan couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in how others interacted with him. There were no more snickers or whispered insults, just nods of acknowledgement and occasional smiles. Even Jake, who sat a few rows ahead, glanced back briefly and offered a curt nod. It wasn't friendship, but it was respect, and that meant something. Ethan took his seat, trying to quell the nervous flutter in his chest. He didn't expect to win anything, not after years of flying under the radar, but he couldn't deny the sense of pride swelling within him. Whether or not his name was called, he knew he'd already achieved something remarkable. He'd reclaimed his dignity and inspired others to do the same. The ceremony began with the usual fanfare. Trophies were handed out for academic excellence, athletic prowess, and artistic talent. Ethan clapped politely as each winner stepped onto the stage, accepting their award with wide grins and waves to the audience. Then, just as the principal prepared to announce the final honor of the evening, she paused and looked out at the crowd. "This next award," she said, her voice warm and steady, "is one we don't give every year. It's reserved for a student who has demonstrated extraordinary resilience, leadership, and compassion in the face of adversity. This individual has not only overcome personal challenges but has also inspired others to see strength in vulnerability. The recipient of this year's Courage Award is Ethan Carter." A hush fell over the auditorium. For a moment, Ethan thought he must have misheard. His heart thudded in his chest as Chloe nudged him gently. "That's you," she whispered, her eyes shining with excitement. Stunned, Ethan rose slowly from his seat. The room erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than anything he'd ever experienced. As he made his way to the stage, his legs felt unsteady, but his resolve was firm. Each step brought a rush of memories, the taunts, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, and the realization that he had faced them all and emerged stronger. When he reached the podium, the principal handed him a plaque engraved with the words Courage Award. She smiled warmly as the applause continued, then gestured for him to speak. Ethan gripped the sides of the podium, his palms slick with sweat. The spotlight illuminated his face, and for a brief second, he felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him. But then he remembered Marcus Aurelius' words, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "I didn't think I'd ever stand here," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "For most of my life, I felt like an outsider, like someone who didn't belong. And honestly, there were times when I believed the things people said about me, that I was weak, that I didn't matter." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. Some students nodded knowingly, while others looked away, perhaps recalling their own roles in his struggles. "But along the way, I learned something important," he continued. "Strength isn't about never feeling afraid or never doubting yourself. It's about choosing to keep going even when you're scared. It's about finding meaning in your pain and using it to help others. Ethan's gaze drifted to Chloe, who gave him an encouraging smile, and then to Jake, whose expression was unreadable but thoughtful. He swallowed hard, gathering his courage. To anyone out there who feels invisible, who thinks they'll never be enough, I want you to know that you are. You are enough exactly as you are. And if you can find the courage to face your fears, you might just discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. The room erupted into thunderous applause once more. But this time Ethan didn't feel overwhelmed. Instead, he felt grounded, connected to the people around him in a way he never had before. As he stepped off the stage, several students approached him to offer congratulations, their faces glowing with admiration. Later that evening, as Ethan sat in his room reflecting on the day's events, he opened Meditations to a passage he'd marked weeks earlier. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. He smiled faintly, realizing how true those words had become for him. He hadn't sought revenge against those who had hurt him. Instead, he had risen above their cruelty, proving that kindness and resilience were far more powerful than hate. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "You were amazing today. So proud of you." Ethan typed a quick reply. "Thanks. Couldn't have done it without you." As he set the phone aside, he felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He knew life would still present challenges, there would always be obstacles to overcome, but he was ready. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerabilities, and discovered a strength within himself that no one could take away. The weeks following the award ceremony marked a turning point not only for Ethan but also for the culture of Maplewood High. His speech had planted seeds of change, inspiring students and teachers alike to rethink how they treated one another. Conversations about kindness, empathy, and resilience became more common in classrooms and hallways. Even Jake, who had once been Ethan's primary tormentor, began to soften, though his transformation was gradual and unspoken. One day as Ethan passed him in the hallway, Jake muttered a quiet "good luck" before walking away. It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, a small yet significant step toward reconciliation. Ethan, however, didn't dwell on these changes too much. He understood that true growth wasn't about external validation or fixing everyone else. It was about staying true to himself and continuing to live by the principles he'd embraced. Each morning as he prepared for school, he reminded himself of Epictetus' wisdom. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. He carried this mindset into every interaction, choosing humility over pride and patience over frustration. It wasn't always easy, there were still moments when old insecurities crept in, but he faced them with the same stoic resolve that had carried him through darker times. At home, Sarah noticed a newfound confidence in her son. Gone was the withdrawn boy who used to retreat to his room after school, hiding from the world. In his place stood someone grounded, thoughtful, and compassionate. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to him with a soft smile. "You've changed so much," she said. "I don't just mean since last year, I mean since the beginning of this school year. You're lighter." Ethan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, I feel different. Like I finally know who I am, or at least I'm getting closer to figuring it out." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "You've always been special, Ethan. I'm just glad you're starting to see that too." Her words filled him with warmth, but they also reminded him of something Seneca had written. No person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have. He realized then that his journey wasn't about achieving perfection or erasing all pain, it was about learning to find peace amidst imperfection. And in that moment, sitting beside his mother under the golden hues of the setting sun, he felt truly content. As graduation approached, Ethan found himself reflecting on the lessons he'd learned, not just from books but from life itself. Stoicism had given him tools to navigate adversity, but it had also taught him something deeper. The importance of community, connection, and purpose. He knew he couldn't face the world alone, and he didn't have to. People like Chloe, Ms. Alvarez, and even his mother had played vital roles in his journey, offering support when he needed it most. On the day of graduation, as Ethan walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he paused briefly to scan the audience. There was Sarah, beaming with pride, and Chloe, waving enthusiastically. Even Mr. Thompson, his history teacher, gave him a subtle thumbs up. For the first time in years, Ethan felt fully seen, not as the awkward kid with glasses, but as someone worthy of love and respect. When the ceremony ended, Ethan lingered outside with his friends, savoring the bittersweetness of the moment. As they laughed and reminisced about their high school years, he felt a pang of nostalgia, but also excitement for what lay ahead. College applications had been sent, acceptance letters received, and plans made. The future was uncertain, but that no longer frightened him. Instead, it filled him with possibility. That night, as he packed up his room in preparation for the move to college, Ethan came across Meditations again. Flipping through its worn pages, he marveled at how much those ancient teachings had shaped his life. On the final page, he jotted down a note to his future self. Remember where you came from, and how far you've come. Keep moving forward, one step at a time. Closing the book, he placed it carefully in his suitcase alongside other cherished belongings. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new lessons, but he was ready. He had faced the worst of what life could throw at him and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. 5 years later, Ethan Carter stood on a stage very different from the one at Maplewood High. This time, he wasn't accepting an award or giving a speech as a nervous teenager. He was addressing a packed auditorium of college students, educators, and community members at a national conference on resilience and mental health. The theme of the event was Finding Strength in Adversity, and Ethan had been invited to share his story, not just as a survivor of bullying, but as someone who had transformed pain into purpose. As he adjusted the microphone and surveyed the crowd, he felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but also a deep sense of gratitude. These were people who understood struggle, who carried their own scars and sought solace in shared experiences. They weren't here for platitudes or empty promises. They wanted authenticity, vulnerability, and hope. And Ethan knew exactly what to give them. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "When I was 16 years old, I thought my life was over before it even began. I spent most days feeling invisible, like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the labels others had given me. Weak, awkward, unimportant." A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. Some nodded knowingly while others leaned forward, hanging on his every word. "But then," Ethan continued, "I discovered something that changed everything: Stoicism. It wasn't just philosophy, it was a lifeline. Through the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, I learned that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from facing it with courage and grace. I learned that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "And let me tell you that realization saved me." Ethan went on to recount his journey, the bullying, the isolation, the moments of doubt, and how he had used Stoic principles to rebuild his sense of self-worth. He spoke about the assembly at Maplewood High, the friendships he'd forged, and the ripple effect his story had created. By the time he finished, the room was silent except for the sound of sniffles and muffled sobs. When the applause finally broke out, it was thunderous, a tidal wave of emotion that left Ethan momentarily speechless. After the session, dozens of attendees lined up to speak with him. Some thanked him for putting their struggles into words. Others asked for advice on applying Stoic teachings to their own lives. One young woman, barely older than Ethan had been during his darkest days, approached him with tears streaming down her face. "I didn't think anyone would understand," she whispered. "But hearing your story, it makes me feel like maybe I'm not alone." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "And neither am I. That's the beauty of this journey, we don't have to go through it by ourselves." Later that evening, as Ethan sat in his hotel room reflecting on the day, he opened his laptop and scrolled through messages from friends and family back home. Chloe had sent him a photo of the two of them from high school, laughing together on the bleachers. Beneath it, she'd written, "So proud of you, Ethan. You've come so far, and you're helping so many people along the way." Her words brought tears to his eyes. But they also reminded him of something Marcus Aurelius had once written, "What we do now echoes in eternity." Ethan realized then that his journey wasn't just about personal growth, it was about creating ripples of change that extended far beyond himself. Every student he inspired, every person he helped see their own worth, carried a piece of his story forward. And in doing so, they became part of something greater. The next morning, as Ethan boarded a plane back to New York City, where he now worked as a counselor and writer, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Life hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't perfect. There were days when doubt crept in, when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But those moments no longer defined him. Instead, they reminded him of how far he'd come, and how much further he could go. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Ethan closed his eyes and allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who had hidden behind books and avoided eye contact, convinced he would never belong. And he thought about the man he had become, resilient, compassionate, and unafraid to stand in the light. For the first time in his life, Ethan truly believed he was enough, not because of external achievements or validation, but because of the strength he had cultivated within himself. Stoicism had taught him that adversity wasn't something to fear, it was an opportunity to grow. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly hold challenges, he faced it with unwavering resolve. In the years that followed, Ethan continued to write and speak about resilience, drawing inspiration from both ancient philosophy and modern psychology. His book, Not Weak, Finding Strength in Vulnerability, became a bestseller, resonating with readers around the world. Yet despite his success, he remained humble, always reminding himself of where he had started, and how much he owed to those who had supported him along the way. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ethan walked through Central Park, he stopped to watch a group of children playing near the fountain. Their laughter echoed through the air, pure and unguarded. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to live without fear, to move through the world with the same boundless joy. Then, smiling softly, he turned and kept walking. He didn't need to chase perfection anymore. He had already found what mattered most: peace, purpose, and the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time. This story is more than just a journey of overcoming adversity. It's an invitation to reflect on how Stoicism can transform your life. Did you identify with the challenges faced by the protagonist? Share your thoughts in the comments and inspire others to embrace this powerful philosophy too. Rocket, don't forget to leave a like to support the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos, and subscribe to keep receiving inspiring content. Also, check out an excellent reading suggestion in the video description and in the first pinned comment. Together, we can learn to face any adversity with wisdom and courage.